We all know people who are difficult, challenging, and they're not always aggressive. They could be very quiet. They could be negative. They could be people pleasers, tell you yes every minute and then do nothing. They could be indecisive stallers where they just can't make up their mind and you never get anywhere. So that's disruptive behavior. And that's along with aggressive behavior. And although we often think that the aggressive behavior is the worst, and it isn't fun, the only advantage of aggressive behavior is that you know where you stand because it's in your face. That doesn't make it fun. Often with disruptive behaviors that are not aggressive, they're circuitous. They're from the side, you don't know what's coming. They say yes, they mean no, they do one thing and say another. And so that you have to figure it out more. And you have to really work with this and with all of them. So really the goal of today is for you to look at what are the aggressive and disruptive behaviors that you're working with at work. You can also look at this in your personal life. And also, how do we work with them? Because we can't change other people. And the reason that these people have these behaviors is because these behaviors work for them, right? They get what they want from the behaviors. And so what we need are strategies so that we don't buy in and get sucked into that behavior, and then we kind of lose control of where we are and of the situation. So that's kind of an overview of where we are. And the material we're going to talk about today is patterned by a well-known psychologist who's been around for decades. His name is Dr. Robert Bramson. I loved his work then, and I still love his work, even though there are many other books on difficult behaviors. His book is called How to Cope with Difficult Behavior, and he has wonderful theories that I like to utilize. So I source him a lot because of his colorful descriptions about difficult behaviors, aggressive and disruptive. All right, so let's start. So here's my question to you. And I'm going to ask you to put your answers into the chat room. And the reason that I do that is otherwise this becomes a lecture. And when it becomes a lecture, I don't think you're gaining as much as when I'm asking you to really think about it. So what I'm going to ask you to do is answer this. Who are the difficult people in your life? And just put the answer into the chat room. If you want everybody to see it, it's to everyone. If you want just me to see it, it's to Patricia Raskin, host. I read all the chats. I don't read the names. All right, so who are they? Your immediate family. No names. Your relatives. Your service providers. Your colleagues. Your patients. Your supervisors. Your organization leaders. Your vendors. Who are the difficult people in your life? Parents, entitled employees, all. Okay. Think about this. Families of residents, relatives, organizations, and leaders. What I'm going to ask you to do throughout this workshop is I'm going to ask you to pick one of the most challenging people that you're working with. All right. So everybody think of one right now. Just pick one. Just to yourself. You might want to write the name down or the initials. And I want you to follow through this workshop as you're listening. I want you to come up with what you think might be some strategy to work with them. All right. And who they are. And all can be challenging. All right. Let's go to the next slide. What are your hot buttons? What behaviors push your buttons? And what does it feel like when someone pushes your buttons? Now, we all have different hot buttons. Something might make me very upset and angry, and somebody else next to me might not feel it at all. So what's your hot button? All right, so let me give you an example. Too many deadlines, getting stuck in traffic, people who are rude. Let's see, feeling totally devalued. Now, let me tell you where your real hot buttons are. We all have several main core needs. It's like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And these are the ones I've distilled it to, meaning that these are the things that if you don't have these basic needs met, this is where your hot button, and usually your hot button will go to one of these things. Number one, feeling safe, secure, and stable. Number two, feeling connected and part of something. Number three, feeling valued and worthy. So usually when something is a hot button, it goes back to one of those things. So for example, if you feel, right, someone just said too many questions asked at the same time, okay, that would be a hot button, okay? And what does that relate to? Well, it makes you feel disconnected. Sometimes it makes you feel like not worthy or not capable because you can't get it all at once, which you can't because you've got too much coming at you, right? So what type of behavior really pushes your buttons? I mean, think about when you get really like hot or annoyed. What's the behavior? Disrespect. That pushes my buttons too. Someone else. Not accepting responsibility for actions, absolutely. My next question is, what does it feel like when someone hits your hot buttons? How do you feel? I often feel not worthy or devalued. Someone said aggression. What does it feel like? Tired, done, yep. Angry, unappreciated, not in control, blaming others. Okay, I'm going to move on. All right. How have you handled the difficult people in your life? So I want you to think of it. You can think about that one person I asked you to think about, or you can think about in general. Do you ignore them? Do you argue with them? Do you avoid them? Do you state your case? Do you walk around them? Do you try to reason with them? Do you accommodate them? Do you limit your time with them? Do you create a win-win? Someone said, I pray for them. Good. And true. I mean, and that's also helpful because you're taking it out of yourself, right? Because when you do prayer, you're not taking it personally. Okay. Limit time with them. A couple people have said they limit the time with them. Anyone else? Anyone else? Think about that person that really is difficult. I acknowledge how important their needs are, even if they're being rude to me. That's another good one because what you're doing is you're depersonalizing it. You're not taking it personally and letting it wound you. And that's very important because once you let it wound you, then it's very hard to react in an appropriate way that creates a win-win because you're wounded. Anyone else want to share? These are great comments and thank you and keep them coming. Anyone else? How have you handled those difficult people in your life? All right, let's move on. What's in our control? Ourself and our reactions. What's not in our control? The attitude of the other person and the actions of the other person. You are not going to change them, but you can change the way you react. So here's what we're going to talk about today. And this is, as you see at the bottom of the slide, the source is Dr. Bramson, Coping with Difficult People. So here are the different ones. And basically he's named them and I love the names. They're so helpful. Hostile aggressives, And there are 3 types. We'll talk about them. Complainers. Now, the aggressives are those aggressive behaviors, and there's 3 types. We're going to talk about them. There's the Sherman tank, there's the bulldozer, there's the know-it-all, and there's the exploder. So those can be hostile aggressive. Sometimes the know-it-all expert is not hostile aggressive, but certainly the exploders are, and the Sherman tanks. And we also can put the snipers in there. Now, others are disruptive behaviors. The complainer, the silent and unresponsive. Think about people you may know in these categories. The super agreeable. Everything they smile and say yes, and they don't do anything. The negativists. Negativists are tough because they can really upset the apple cart. The know-it-all experts. Then the bulldozers and balloons. Bulldozers are, again, hostile aggressive. Balloons are know-it-all experts that really don't know, but they puff themselves up and they think they know, and they say it in a way that you believe them, but they really don't have the answer. And that's the phony balloon. And then the indecisive staller that can drive you crazy because you never get a decision. So these are the types of behaviors we're going to talk about today. Okay, so let me ask you a question. Just look at these and just think about where you think this person you're focusing on is. Even before we start the webinar or go into these in depth. Anybody want to put in the chat room which of these you think that person is? Complainer. Yes, very common. Anyone else? Anyone else? All right, let's move on. So now what we're going to talk about are the hostile aggressives. And these are all in the category of the aggressive personality. And there's 3 different types here. There's the Sherman tank, there's the sniper, and there's the exploder. I'm going to go over each one, but I'm going to tell you the difference just very quickly. The Sherman tank, as you can see, is right in your face. They're screaming at you. The sniper is making a funny comment from behind or as a joke, but it's not a joke. And we'll talk about what that is. And then there's the exploder. And a lot of people fear the exploder the most because they just explode in your face. They're screaming. Sherman tanks have a very strong, loud, opinionated message, but exploders just scream in your face. And sometimes you feel unsafe. Right? So let's look at this category because this is a big part of this. So when we look at the Sherman tank, they bully and they overwhelm by bombarding others. Okay. So what are some of the things that they do? Okay. So let's take a look again at what they do. They bully, they bombard you, they come on very strong, they talk fast, they don't, and they know everything. So how do you handle that hostile aggressive, that Sherman tank? Well, you want to stand up to them without fighting. You want to give them a little bit of time to run down so that you don't just jump in, you wait till there's a pause. You might want to get their attention by calling their name and get them sometimes to sit down while maintaining eye contact. Now, there's a few more solutions in here. You also don't want to argue with them or try to cut them down because if you do, that's what they're looking for. Their fuel is that argument. There are a lot of people that love to argue. You know, and they'll egg you on. So don't argue. Don't cut them down. Be ready to be friendly. And the key here is stating your opinion and your perception forcefully. Okay. So let me give you an example of that. So someone talks to you and starts telling you what should be and the way you should think, or you feel belittled. And you let them talk and then you state your case, such as, wait a minute, John, wait a minute, Joan, and explain what happened in a strong way that's forceful and strong, but is not yelling at them and is not belittling them in any way. And then pause. Because usually you can deal with a Sherman tank, meaning that this is their style, but they will respect you in most cases if you come up with, you stand up to them because they want something to work. Now, many times, not always, but you can find Sherman tanks at work. You can find them in our leaders. And often people are afraid of them, and they're afraid because they're afraid of being cut down. So it's very important that you state your case and you have good facts behind you. All right. Any comments about the Sherman tanks? If anybody in this group feels that you have dealt with the Sherman tank, just put a Y in the chat room. Someone said what they're dealing with are balloons, hostiles, know-it-all expert, indecisive stallers, and someone wrote, exploders are the worst to me. Okay, yes. Getting quite a few here who've dealt with, right. All right. Now let's move on to another type. This next one may feel like it's better than the Sherman tank, but actually I think this one's worse. And I'll tell you why. Because they make a cutting remark, but they often do it in a very funny way. Like you walk into a room and they say, "Oh, Patricia," and you're late. "Oh, Patricia, so glad you could make it. You're only 20 minutes late. You missed some, but it's fine." And you laugh. So what they've done is they've belittled you. And they've done it in an aggressive way, trying to make it into a joke. And so it depends on the situation on how you handle this, but let's take a look at it. If anybody's dealt with these, please put it in the chat room. Just do yes. Smoke them out. Don't let social conventions stop you. What does that mean? Sometimes you might say, "Gee, I was late because there was a traffic jam. Was that a joke? Was that a joke?" Because it sounded like a dig. Now, you may not be able to say that, but if you can, let them know you've got it. Like, "Gee, were you kidding? Because I was caught in a traffic jam. And it didn't sound funny," or something like, "Gee, it doesn't sound funny to me when I'm stuck in traffic for 3 hours." So you're standing up to them, but you're not putting them down. Give them an alternative to a direct contest, just like that. "Gee, that may seem funny, but it didn't feel funny to me when I was stuck in traffic for 2 hours and called in." Get other points of view. Don't just capitulate to theirs. Someone said they deal with snipers every day. All right. Focus on the problem. Try to get off of the personality. What's the problem? And set up a problem-solving meeting. And stay out of the middle by insisting that sniping stop when you're around. Okay, someone said just now in the chat room that you have dealt with sniping almost every day. How have you handled it? How have you handled it? Just put it in the chat room. Try to talk to them about it. Yes, but not when they're sniping, right? And many times aggressive people are strong. They're clever. They're bright. They have they're good communicators. So use those things to your advantage, but not when they're in the middle of that behavior. Now, I'm going to look at the last one here of the aggressives. And this one, in teaching this many, many times, people have said are the most fearful. They actually throw tantrums. Now, you don't see that as much today because it's really not tolerated well in the workplace. And in some places, it could be grounds for dismissal or for disciplinary action. Not always. It depends. If it's the owner of the company, not that's different. And many times people will leave. And what I've been hearing and reading is that many times our younger generations of people will not tolerate this kind of behavior the way older generations did, right? They would rather, not make as much money, but have a good work environment. So when the exploder is the boss, then you may have to have a choice. You may have to make a choice. But they explode throwing tantrums. And that's scary because, again, that's where your safety and your security is then threatened. So how do you deal with them? Give them a little time to run down and regain self-control. But if they don't, break into their tantrum and say stop and show them you take them seriously. Get a breather and find a private area with them. Right? Or here's something else that you can do. And I've seen this work effectively. John or Joan, I would really like to talk with you, but you're screaming at me and I cannot talk with you when you're screaming. I can't even hear you. It's like I'm either I shut down or I can't hear you, or I can't discuss with you when you're screaming at me. So we either need to have to change that, or let's take a break. But in a very calm way. Because if don't you scream at me, all that does is exacerbate it. Okay. Any comments before we move on? Any comments about the hostile aggressives, the exploders, the snipers, and the Sherman tanks? Someone said, I deal with snipers quite often. I just ignore them. I have to wait to calm down first. The problem with ignoring a sniper, though, is that then they keep doing that. And it might work for you because you know how to handle it, but for other people, it can be debilitating because they feel demoralized, they feel belittled, they feel cut down. So I think it's something that does need to be addressed. Someone wrote, it's a passive way to project negativity. Absolutely. But it's not always passive. But yes, thank you. Anyone else? All right, let's move on. We're going to move on. Now, we've talked about the aggressives. So you might think, oh, these are the worst because they're in my face and they're screaming. Yes, but the other behaviors are just as difficult in a different way, because you're not sure what you're dealing with. You've got to figure it out. With aggressives, they tell you. All right, let's move on. A lot of you put this next one into the chat. The complainer. They gripe incessantly. They don't take action. They feel powerless to take action, and they don't want to be responsible. We call them passive aggressives because, and they can also become negativists, which we'll talk about. And that can really upset the group, and it can be contagious. But they gripe. So one of the things you want to look at with the complaining person is, if they're going to gripe and if they're going to say something, right, then how would they solve it? So this is where we as leaders want to take responsibility to work with the complainer to get something positive from them. So listen attentively, even when you feel guilty or impatient. Paraphrase what they say and check for agreement. Don't agree or apologize on the spot, even if it seems okay. Avoid the accusation, defense, and re-accusation pattern. Okay, so I think that's really important. And again, you want to try not to be impatient, because I think that's what, many times, as we said, it's passive aggressive. Sometimes they're angry. Sometimes they don't feel heard. All right, so here are some other things that you can do. State the facts without commentary. Get complaints in writing. And finally ask, how do you want this to end? You also want to listen to what they're saying and ask for their opinions. Someone just put into the chat, do you think complainers are depressed with the situation they're in? Sometimes. Not always. Sometimes people just like to complain. I mean, it's their way. They'll find the one little spot on the tablecloth that you didn't see. That can be complaining and negative too. Or they look for that. However, this is where you can help them. You can ask them questions like, why do you feel that way? And what do you think we can do about it? Now, if they come up with, well, nothing, because nothing ever gets done here, so forget it. I mean, say, well, okay. But if you were running the show, what would you do? So you keep pushing them to come up with things. And then how reasonable is this? And then if they keep being negative, you want to say, all right, you've said a few things that sound feasible. Would you be willing to try one of these for a day or two or a week? Get agreement, get it in writing, and then come back. You want to show them they're important. You want to show them their opinion counts. You want to show them you're listening to them, but you also want to show them that the behavior is not getting them anywhere, because complaining doesn't do anything unless you take action. But remember, they've gotten places because they've complained. And yes, they could be depressed. And that's where you can dig deeper. You can usually figure that out, because if people are really down and depressed, you can sense their energy and their lethargy, their lethargy. All right. Any comments? And please put all of your answers into the chat room if you have any. In terms of messages, as I said to you before, if you would like to send a message to me privately, Patricia Raskin, host, I read all the messages, but I don't read the names. If you send your message to everyone, then everyone will see your message. So that's totally up to you. They all get read without names. Right? Let's go to the next person. Okay. All right. Now let's talk about, this is so interesting, the silent and unresponsive person, right? They respond to every question with, yep, nope, grunt. And I know people like this. It's maddening. It's maddening. Did you enjoy this today? Yep. What do you think? Good. Okay. Is it really good? Yep. And it can be maddening. So what are some of the things you can do? Don't interrupt the silence. Get them to do it for you. Ask an open-ended question. That's what I do. Well, what did you think about that? What did you like about it? What was your opinion? And wait as calmly as you can for a response. Some people use this as a power play, because then you have to keep bringing them out so they get attention. Anybody know anybody who's like this, silent and unresponsive? Put a yes in the chat. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Another thing you can do not fill the silence with your conversation, because that's what they want. Then they don't have to talk. Plan enough time to keep your composure while you wait for answers. If there's no response, comment on what's happening. Repeat the open-ended question again and wait and comment again. All right, now we're going to get to a group that you're going to think, oh, well, this is easy, but it's not. The super agreeable. They are personable. They are funny. They are outgoing. They're reasonable. They're sincere, and they're supportive. They don't produce, and they don't keep their word. They often act opposite to what you expect. The problem with that I have found is that we start to lose not just respect for the person, but we don't trust. We don't trust them or what they're going to say because they've let us down. And that's the hard thing. And I think that's something, let's take a look at how we handle that. You must work hard at extracting the facts. You want to let them know you value them and talk to them absolutely directly. Okay? And ask them about their hobbies and their family. You want them to know that they're important. And you can also, let them know too that, it's disappointing to you when you don't get a response because they really seemed so enthusiastic. Sometimes there are clues. I'm going to give you an example of that in a minute. So here's some more things. Get them to tell you what interferes with your relationship. Be ready to compromise, right? Not give in, but compromise. And listen to their humor because sometimes it contains meanings. I'm going to give you an example of this. This just happened to me. I was working with someone who was going to help me on a project. And we came up with all of the parameters. And the person was excited. And we came up with a schedule of when they were going to help and all of that. And there was just something when I got, off of the call, like later in the day, something said to me, I don't know, there's something off here. Sure enough, the next day I get an email. Hi, Patricia, I loved meeting with you. And it was such a fabulous opportunity. And because of other priorities, I can't help you. Okay. I wasn't surprised. Why? Because as we were talking, when we would set a date, I would say, now, is that a good time? And she'd go, yeah. And I'd say, now, are you sure this doesn't interfere with this other project? Yeah. No, it's good. It was always with a hesitancy. And that's what I think made me not surprised when I got that note. I think she did want to do the project. I think it was more than she thought. And it would have been nice to get that. It would have been much nicer to be able to have her say, this was really much more than I thought. I even wrote back and said, if you'd like to do a lesser, like a piece of the project, rather than all of it, let me know. I heard nothing. So this is that whole thing. And it's disappointing because we often count on these people. Okay. Someone asked for a copy of the slides, and yes, I have sent them. I've sent them, but I can certainly, I believe that Christina has them. Okay. Someone said, I definitely can be super agreeable working on it. And that's another thing is, you may be one of these personalities at times. So think about that. Okay. All right. Let's go on. Now, this one is really close. I'm going to tell you the one I dislike the most of all of these, believe it or not. Well, actually, you would guess this because my work is all about positive thinking and positive living. This is the one that makes me very upset, negativist. It's a constant, nothing's going to work. It won't work vocabulary, self-talk. It's impossible. They'll burst your bubble. They'll temper your enthusiasm or optimism. I had a colleague like this, very smart woman, very bright. We would go to an event together and she'd say, did you see that? And I'd say, what? I didn't even see it, but she would find one thing and it became the whole thing. And it eventually actually ended our friendship. We still we're still professional friends, but it's not the same because it was just very hard for me. Yet she's a critical thinker. She's a writer. She's very smart. So, there are qualities that negative people have. We need to look at what's negative. We can't be Pollyanna or positive all the time. But if that's going to color everything, then we don't see the positive at all. So, you can't see only the positive, but you can't see only the negative either. All right, let's take a look at what you can do. Be alert to being dragged down into despair. Don't try to argue them out of their pessimism. That will never work. Don't offer your own solutions until the problem has been thoroughly discussed. All right, let me give you some more, and then I have some more comments. If the solution has a downside, bring it up, because they will, if you don't. Look at their doom sayings as problems to overcome. Be ready to take action on your own. Avoid asking the analytical negativist to act before they're ready. So here's something you can do. You're in a group meeting, right? And they're bringing up this negativity, or they just say it's not going to work. And then you listen to them in your problem solving. And you listen to, and then you can say, well, why do you think that won't work? And they tell you, and let them explain it. And then at the end, when you've made the decision, you can say to the negative, well, respect your opinion. And that's something we need to look out for. We want to make sure we don't fall into that pit hole. However, we're going to try it this way. And we hope that you'll be on board. And we're glad that you've pointed out possible pitfalls. Do you see what we're doing here? We're not saying you're wrong, you're negative. We're saying that point is important, but it's not going to color our picture here. We're still going to move on the way we were. Any comments about this? Any comments about this one? And if any of you want to unmute and ask a question, please do. All right. Yes, this is a very good question. Absolutely. Can people be a mix of types? Absolutely. And in one case, they might be, a bully or a Sherman tank. And maybe in another case where they're threatened by somebody else who's a Sherman tank, they may become a negativist or a complainer or quiet and unresponsive. I mean, think about your own personality. Are you always one thing? No. Sometimes you do complain. Sometimes you might be very silent, unresponsive. The idea here is to understand we all have these tendencies and how do we deal with them? And if it's you, then look at how you can change that. If it's your behavior. Now, this is an interesting one. We've got two types here. This is the know-it-all expert and the balloons and bulldozers. Now, the know-it-all expert feels and acts superior. They believe and want you to believe they are the experts. They're condescending, they're imposing, and they're pompous, and they can make you feel like an idiot. They're different from the Sherman tank because they're almost like the professor that states these facts and, I know my stuff and I'm the expert. Now, in many cases, they are the expert in their field. That doesn't mean it's the only answer. So how do you deal with them? Know your material code, because you're not going to fool them. If they say 1975 and it was 1973, just say, and again, you want to avoid dogmatic statements. You want to say, in my opinion. So you want to listen. So you might say, I read something on that and I thought that was 1972. Is that possible? Right? Rather than you're wrong. Okay, so that's really important. Let's look at some more. Disagree tentatively, but don't equivocate. Ask a leading question. Don't you think that? Watch for your own bulldozing tendencies, because they can become a bulldozer too, that know-it-all expert. And look toward building a relationship of equals. I mean, the know-it-all expert, after a while is going to be tired of just knowing everything and not having anybody respond. So you want to be able to engage them and respect them, but also have a relationship where they can hear you too. Any questions about the know-it-all expert? All right, let's look at the next one, which is the bulldozer. I'm sorry, which is the know-it-all, the phonies. They're the balloons, right? So state your own perception, restate the facts and alternatives accurately. You try to help them save face as well, and I'll share more about that. They're the ones that think they know everything and they're stating it incorrectly because they don't, right? We see that all the time. I mean, we've seen that in leaders. We've seen that in people who, have the power and they just state it. And then people have to do the fact finding afterwards. Give them an opportunity to save face. Be ready to fill the conversation gap. If possible, cope with them whenever they're alone. And that's when you can say, gee, I thought it was such and such. So again, you have to be a little with the know-it-all expert, it's a little different because they usually know their facts cold. So you're not usually correcting them, but you also want to gain their respect because after a while, the know-it-all expert's going to be lonely because people just don't want to be around somebody that thinks they know everything all the time. So again, this is where you can help. Let me go back to that slide. This is where you can help that know-it-all expert by, watching for your own tendency and respecting what they have to say, but also you being able to speak up as well. And then the phonies, the balloons, again, you want to try to let them save face if you can, or restate it in a way that the fact is out there. Any comments so far? All right. And here's one we talked about before that drives people crazy: the indecisive staller. They stall on major decisions. A decision has to be made for them. They are waiting for a decision to be perfect. So if it can't be perfect, they're not going to do it at all. They blame you if things don't work out. They cop out by inaction. They cop out by inaction. So what do? Get them to tell you about conflicts and reservations. Look for indirect words. Look for hesitations or omissions. Help them solve their problem with the decision. And you can say, I mean, I've said to people, you seem hesitant. Or, I'm seeing the expression on your face. I'm not sure you're sure about this. Because the more you can bring out the objection, right, the more you can act on it and then decrease the amount of time that's being stalled. Here's some more on that. If there are reservations about you, acknowledge any past problems. Like, you and I've had disagreements in the past, or we didn't get to finish this project together, and I really would like to work with you. Okay. State the facts non-defensively and propose a plan and ask for help. Many times they're stuck. Sometimes they don't know what to do, so they do nothing. Again, it's like, if I can't be perfect, I'm not going to do it at all. And that certainly doesn't help. All right. Now we've gone through most of the personalities. So what I'd like you to do before we move on is I'd like you to put in the chat room, I want you to think about that person, right, that was difficult. Which of these personalities would you say that person is? And just put it in the chat room. Let me go back here to the beginning. Let me go back. Here they are. Hostile aggressives, complainers, silent non-responsive, super agreeables, negativists, know-it-all experts, bulldozers and balloons, know-it-all experts, indecisive stallers. And the hostile aggressives are the exploders and the Sherman tanks and the snipers. Okay. What would you say you've dealt with most of all with that person? I'd love it if most of you can put something in here. It'd be interesting to see if most of you are dealing with the same type of personality. Indecisive stallers, negativists, complainers, negativists. Know-it-alls, negativists. Silent, non-responsive, indecisive stallers, know-it-all experts, complainers. What about the people that are agreeable to your face, but throw you under the bus to the leadership? Well, they're really not agreeable, are they? I mean, they're changing. So they could be snipers, right? They could be super agreeable, but really they could be snipers underneath that. Know-it-all and complainers, know-it-all. Anyone else? Yeah. And it's interesting. Some hostile aggressives, but it's being able to stand up to these people without being intimidated. And let me say this, you know who you're dealing with, even before you deal with them. I mean, unless it's a new person and they blindside you. But usually, you know that personality. So plan ahead. How are you going to handle it when they start doing their behavior? And on a personal note, with the holidays, many times we have to deal with these difficult people in our family that we only see once a year. So you know what they're going to do. How can you handle it? And particularly if you get somebody at the dining room table who's, wants to have a political fight or wants to just, really be cantankerous and get people aggravated. And that's when you need to stand your ground and just say, look, I respect how you feel, but, we want to have a good time today. I don't really want to talk about that. And sometimes people will egg you on. Well, what do you mean? How come you don't want to talk about it? Well, because you know how I feel, and we're not, and I respect your opinion. Hopefully you respect mine. And today is a day of celebration. So again, you want to stay strong in what you're doing. All right, so we're going to go back and we're going to look at what we do now. How do we assess all of this in terms of what are the steps that we look at? And so that's next. So here we go. There are 6 fundamental steps. 1, we assess the situation, right? What kind of personality is this? Let's assess it. Stop wishing that difficult person was different. Get some distance between you and the difficult behavior. Now, sometimes if it happens and you've never met them before, it's happened to me, and it's like, what just happened? I didn't respond the way I could have because I didn't expect it. So get some distance when you can. Formulate a coping plan. What's going to be your strategy? And then implement it. And then monitor the effectiveness. You may have to modify it. Maybe one day they're super agreeable and the next day they're negative. So how do we modify that plan? All right. Comments or questions? All right. I have a story I'm going to share with you at the end, but I want to ask you this first. What is one thing that you feel that you have gained from this webinar? And what question might you have? So please, and you can unmute and ask a question, but what's something you feel you gained that was helpful? Just put it in the chat room. First thing that comes to mind. Strategies for dealing with different personalities. Okay. What was most helpful? Think of one thing that, hold on. Think of one thing that was most helpful. Different types of difficult people helps think through how to handle different situations. Okay. Anyone else? Identifying the types of negative behaviors. Okay. Identify personalities and know how to deal with them. How do you feel better equipped to deal with this difficult or challenging behavior or aggressive or disruptive behavior? How do you feel now that you may be more equipped or be able to handle it better? Someone said, understanding the many types of personalities and how to handle them. The tone to use to respond in a way that keeps composure and invites compromise. Very important. Good. Any specific things like this, suggestions for how to deal with the personalities to limit frustration, right? And someone said tone, very important. Any one particular strategy that you think was helpful? One particular strategy that you think was really helpful. Listen better even when I feel impatient. Not taking it so personally. It's more about their personality. Not to ignore snipers. Yeah. Because and they get away with it because they do it under the guise of humor many times. Anyone else? Someone asked a question. Are there any of these personalities best to avoid rather than to seek solutions with? Well, it's a good question. I would say more than that. It's not avoiding the personality. It's avoiding their tactics. So example, the person's negative, right? And this won't work in that. Yes, avoid talking, avoid going back and forth with them. They want the fight. Same thing with the Sherman tank, right? Certain ones you want to avoid at the exploder. You don't want to get in a fight with them. So again, in terms of personalities to avoid, you want to avoid certain behaviors with that personality, right? Don't fight back with the exploder or with the Sherman tank or with the negativist. Don't be silent with the person who's not responsive. So those are behaviors to avoid because you may not be able to avoid the person. Many times you can, but you can't always. All right. Don't fill the silence when someone is silent and unresponsive. Good. Thank you. Very specific. Anyone else? Anyone else? Thank you for these very specific comments. All right, let me share my closing story. And I love this story. This story sums up everything. Okay, you ready? Oh, sorry. Here we go. Okay. A turtle and a snake meet by the shore. The snake asks the turtle to carry him across the water. The turtle says, I'm not gonna carry you across the water. You're gonna bite me. And the snake says, I'm not gonna bite you, Mr. Turtle. I just want to ride across the water. And the turtle says, are you sure you're not gonna bite me? And the snake says, I'm not gonna bite you. And the turtle says, okay, and carries the snake to the other side. The snake bites the turtle. The turtle says, Mr. Snake, you promised me you wouldn't bite me. Why did you bite me? You said you wouldn't. And here's the moral of the story. The snake says, I'm so sorry, Mr. Turtle. That's my nature. So that's really what we're talking about today. What we're talking about is understanding you're not going to change them. This is their nature, but you can change what you do. You don't have to carry the snake on your back across the water. Okay. All right, let me say a couple of things. I certainly want to thank you for being here at today's presentation. If you would like to contact me, this is all my information. I do a lot of these webinars and seminars. So if any of you are in organizations and think you'd like to bring this to your group, and I do them not just on this, but also on how do you